Part One，你笑我笑大家笑。Big head，大脑袋。外国人讲，All the kids make fun of me. The boy cried to his mother. They say I have a big head. Don't listen to them. His mother comforted him. You have a beautiful head. Now stop crying and go to the store for 10 pounds of potatoes. Where's the shopping bag? I haven't got one. Use your heart. 中国人讲，小男孩哭着跟妈妈说：“所有的孩子都拿我开玩笑，他们说我长了个大脑袋。”他妈妈就安慰他：“别听他们的，你的脑袋长得很漂亮啊。好了，别哭了，去商店买10磅土豆来。”购物袋在哪里呢？我没有购物袋，就用你的帽子吧。How to become rich? Little brother, I saw you kiss my elder sister, and if you don't give me a nick, I'll tell my father. Sister's boyfriend? No, don't do that. He's a lick. Little boy, brother, that makes a buck and a quarter. I've made this math. Tom, Mom, can I have 2 pieces of cake, please? Mom, certainly. Take this, please, and cut it too. Having been married a long time, my husband sometimes needs a gentle reminder of a special occasion. On the morning of our 65th anniversary, we were sitting at the breakfast table when I hit it. Honey, do you realize that we've been sitting in these same 2 seats for exactly 35 years? Putting down the newspaper, he looked straight at me and said, So, you want to switch seats? A professor was giving a big test one day to his students. He handed out all the tests and went back to his desk to wait. Once the test was over, the students all handed the test back in. The professor noticed that one of the students had attached a $10 bill to his test with a note saying, $1 pay point. The next class, the professor handed the tests back out. This student got back his test and six, 64 change. Your Honor, I want to bring to your attention how unfair it is for my client to be accused of theft. He arrived in New York City a week ago and barely knew his way around. What's more, he only speaks a few words of English. The judge looked at the defendant and asked, "How much English can you speak?" The defendant looked up and said, "Give me your wallet." A husband providing to his wife, that woman took more than man, showed her a study which indicated that men use a village only 15,000 words a day, whereas women use 60,000 words a day. She thought about this for a while and then told her husband that women use twice as many words as men because they have a repeat everything they say. He said, "What? Boy, is this seat empty?" Girl, "Yes, and this one will be if you sit down." "Tom, what's the matter with your brother?" asked the mother in the kitchen. "He's crying." "Oh, nothing, Mom," repeated Tom. "I'm eating my cake. He is crying because I won't give him any." "But has he finished his own cake?" "Yes," said Tom. "And he also cried when I was helping him finish that." "How many queens?" A guy says to his friend. "Guess how many queens I have in my pocket." The friend says, "If I guess right, will you give me one of them?" The first guy says, "If you guess right, I'll give you both of them." Graduate and undergraduate. I can always tell a graduate class from an undergraduate class, said an instructor at a university graduate engineering course. When I say good afternoon, the undergraduate respond good afternoon, but the graduate students just write it down. Making faces. Finding one of her students making faces at others on the playground, Miss Smith stopped to gently reprehend the child. Smiling sweetly, the Sunday school teacher said, Baby, when was a child, I was told if I made ugly faces, my face would freeze and stay like that. Bobby looked up and replied, "Well, Miss Smith, you can't see you uh, weren't. Thanks for the pellets." A guy goes to visit his grandma and he brings his friend with him. While he's talking to his grandma, his friend starts eating the plants on the office table and finishing them off. As they are leaving, his friend says to his grandma, "Thanks for the peanuts." She says, "Yeah, since lost my dentist, I can only suck the chocolate off." You will not have worms. A father was trying to teach his son the evils of alcohol. alcohol. He put one worm in a glass of water and another worm in a glass of whiskey. The worm in the water lived, while the one in the whiskey curled up and died. "All right, son," asked the father, "what does that show you?" "Well, Dad, it shows that if you drink alcohol, you will not have worms." I don't I didn't read the money then. Looking very unhappy, a poor man entered a doctor consulting room. "Doctor," he said, "you must help me. I swallowed a penny about a month ago." "Good heavens, man," said the doctor, "why have you waited so long?" "Why don't you come to me on the day you survived it? To tell you the truth, doctor," the poor man replied, "I didn't need the money so badly then. I never make the same mistake twice, boy. Hi, didn't we go on dates before? Once or twice, girl? Must have been once. I never make the same mistake twice." Quality of a musician in an entrance examination of a conservatory of music. A teacher asked one of the boys, "What is the most important physiological quality of a musician?" "To be deaf," replied the boy. "Nonsense," said the teacher angrily. "Why, sir, don't you know that the famous musician Beethoven was deaf?" the boy asked in reply disbeliefully. "The month is up today," a man said at a bar having the saddest hand dog expression. Bartender, what's the matter? Are you having troubles with your wife? The man, we had a fight and she told me that she wasn't going to speak to me for a month. Bartender, that should make you happy. The man, no, the month is up today. How much for a season? The female dormitory will be out of bounds for all male students and vice versa. Anybody caught breaking this rule will be fined $20. The first time anybody caught breaking this rule, the second time will be fined 60 being called a third time will encourage a fine of $180. Are there any questions? At this moment, a male student in the crowd inquired, how much for a season pass? Can I buy you a drink? Boy, can I buy you a drink? Girl, actually, I'd rather have the money. Falling? Pete, the last time I was out hunting, I stepped off a high cliff, and would you believe it? While I was feeling very full, did either ever done come into my mind? Bob, must have been a petty high mountain you fell from. God isn't deaf, spending the night with their grandparents. Two young boys left behind their beds to say their prayers at Bethlehem. The younger boy began playing at the top of his lungs. I pay for a bag. I pay for a new DVD. His older brother looked at him and said, why are you shouting your place? God isn't deaf. To which the little brother replied, no, but Grandma is. Gaussner's tolerance. Goethe was once strolling on a narrow path in a park in Weimar. As luck would have it, he met with a critical who was hostile to him. Both of them stopped staring at each other. Then the critical said, I'll never make way for a fool, but I will. With that, Goethe restrained us said, cat and mouse. Miss Brown went to visit one of her friends and carried a small box with hole poached in the top. "What's in the box?" asked the friend. "A cat," answered Miss Bond. "You see, I've been dreaming about mice at night, and I'm so carried. This cat is to catch them, but the mice are only imaginary," said the friend. "So is the cat?" Miss Spencer said that my tongue must be hung in the middle, but it isn't. It's firmly fastened at one end. Miss Spencer said your place was named Green Gables. I asked her all about it, and she said there were trees all around it. I was grimmer than ever. I just love trees. And there went Ellie at all about the alarms. Only a few poor, lonely, tiny things out in front with little whitewashed catch things about them. They just looked like hams themselves. Those trees did. It used to make me want to cry to look at them. I used to say to them, "Oh, you poor little things. If you were out in a great big woods with other trees all around you and little mosses and June beans growing over your roots and a brook at far away and birds singing in your branches. You could grow, couldn't you? But you can't where you are. I know just exactly how you feel, little trees. I felt sorry to leave them behind this morning. You do get so attached to things like that, don't you? Is there a brook anywhere near Green Gables. I forgot to ask Miss Spencer that. Well, now, yes, this one right below the house. Fancy. It's always been one of my dreams to live near a brook. I never expect I would, so dreams don't often come true, do they? Wouldn't it be nice if they did? But just now I feel pretty nearly perfectly happy. I can't feel exactly perfectly happy because, well, what color would you call this? She thrust one of her long, glossy braids over her thin shoulder and held it up before Matthew's eyes. Matthew was not used to deciding on the terms of leaders' choice, but in this case there couldn't be much doubt. "It's red, ain't it?" he said. The girl let the bread drop back with a thing that seemed to come from her very tongue, and to exhale forth was the slows of the edges. "Yes, it's right," she said, resented. "Now you see why I can't be perfectly happy. Nobody could who has red hair. I don't mind the other things so much. The freckles and the green eyes and my skinless. I can imagine them away. I can imagine that I have a beautiful rose leaf complexion and the lovely, starry violet eyes. But I cannot imagine that red hair away. I do my best. I think to myself, now my hair is a glorious back as the raven's wing, but all the time I know it is just a pain read and it breaks my heart. It will be my lifelong through. I read of a girl once in a novel who had a lifelong through, but it wasn't read her. Here, 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 here was pure gold rippling back from her alabaster brow. What is an alabaster brow? I never could find out. Can you tell me? Well, no, I'm afraid I can't, said Matthew, who was getting a little dizzy. He felt as the had once felt in his wrath when another boy had entered him on the merry-go-round at a picnic. Well, whatever it was, it must have been something nice, because she was divinely beautiful. Have you ever imagined what it must feel like to be divinely beautiful? Well, no, I haven't, confessed Matthew ingenuously. "I have, often. Which would you rather be if you had the choice? Divinely beautiful or dazzling clever or angelically good?" "Well now, I don't know exactly. Neither do I. I can never decide, but it doesn't make much real difference for it isn't likely I'll ever be either. I'll never be angelically good." Miss Spencer says, "Oh, Miss Cuthbert, oh, Miss Cuthbert, oh, Miss Cuthbert." That was not what Miss Spencer had said. Neither had the child jumped out of the Bungie nor had Matthew done anything ultimately. They had simply rounded a curve in the road and found themselves in the advance. The advance, so called by the Newbridge people, was a stretch of those 400 or 500 yards long, completely arched over with huge, wide-spreading apple trees, planted years ago by an eccentric older farmer. Overhead was one long canyon of snowy forget bloom. Below the banks, the air was full of a purple triumphant and fell ahead a glimpse of painted sunset shone like a great rose window at the end of the cathedral. I see. Its beauty seemed to strike the child dumb. She leaned back in the baggage, her thin hands clasped before her. Her face left rapidly to the white splendor above. Even when they had passed out and were driving down the long slope to Newbridge, she never moved or spoke. Still with rapid face, she gazed afar into the sunset west, with eyes that saw visions dropping splendidly across that growing background. Th- Through New Bridge, a bustling little village where dogs barked at them and small boys halted and curious faces peered from the windows. They drove still in silence. When 3 more miles had dropped away behind them, the child had not spoken. She could keep silence. It was evident, as gently as she could talk. I guess you are feeling pretty tired and hungry, Matthew ventured to say at last, counting for her long visitation of dumb dumbbells was the only reason he could drink of. But we haven't very far to go now, only another mile. She came out of her reverie with a deep sigh and looked at him with the dreamy gaze of a soul that had been wanting a fair starlit. Oh, Miss Gapt, she wept that place we came through, that white place, what was it? Well now, you must mean that avenue, she said Matthew after a few moments of profound reflection. It is kind of pretty place. Petty? Oh, petty doesn't seem the right word to use. Nor beautiful, either. They don't go far enough. Oh, it was wonderful, wonderful. It's the first thing I ever saw that couldn't be improved upon by imagination. It just satisfies me. Here she put one hand on her breast. It made a quarter finely edge, and yet it was a peasant edge. Did you, did you ever have a such like that, Mr. Cuthbert? Well, no, I just can't recollect that ever had. I have it lots of time whenever I see anything really beautiful, but they shouldn't call that lovely place. The heavenly, there is no meaning in a name like that. They should call it, let me see, the white way of delight. Isn't that a nice imaginative name? When I don't like the name of a place or a person, I always imagine a new one and always think of them so. There was a girl at Assam whose name was Hepzibah Jenkins, but I always imagined her as Rosalia de Vella. Other people may call that place the Avenue, but I shall always call it the White Way of Delight. Have we really only another mile to go before we get home? I'm glad and I'm sorry. I'm sorry because this drive has been so pleasant, and I am always sorry when pleasant things end. Something still pleasanter may come after, but you can never be sure, and it's so often the case that it isn't pleasant. That has been my experience anyhow, but I'm glad to think of getting home. You see, I've never had a real home since I can remember. It gives me that pleasant urge again just to think of coming to a really, truly home. Oh, is that pretty? Chapter 1. The Panda. The spring of 1634 arrives, but in the person of Lancaster Castle it stays cold. The 20 women in the person are dirty, hungry, and cold. There are no beds or chairs, and so they sleep on the cold floor. There are no windows, so it is always dark. The women want to get out of the passion. They want to go home. Sometimes the guards open the big old door and put some bread and water on the floor. They, Then they close the door again. My name is Janet Device, and I am one of the 20 women in person. Day after day, I sit on the cold floor and wait. I want to feel warm again. I want to see the sky again. And Panda Hill, the beautiful hill near my home. But I am in the dark prison of Lancaster Castle, and I sit on the cold floor and wait. One day, something happens. The guards open the big old door. Janet Device, a guard calls, "Come here at once." Wretch, somebody wants to see you. I get up slowly because I'm very cold, and I walk across the dark room to the door. Perhaps as someone from Reader Hall, perhaps I'm going home. Janet Device, be quick. The guard calls again. Someone is standing at the door with the guard. Janet, he says quietly. I see him then, a tall man with brown hair and tried blue eyes. He is not from Reed Hall. It is Mr. Webster from the church I'd held back. My legs stop moving. And suddenly I want to sit down. Come on, come on, the guard says angrily. He begins to close the door. Come out here for a minute, Janet, Mr. Webster says quietly. Sit down and eat something. I sit down at a little table near the door. Mr. Webster gives me some bread and some meat, and I begin to eat hungrily. 10 minutes, the guard says. After 10 minutes, she goes in again. Thank you, Mr. Webster says. How is everyone at Reed Hall? I ask at last. Mr. Webster smiles. Everyone is well. I was there yesterday. I close my eyes for a minute. Mr. Webster, it's not true. I'm not a witch. You know, I know, Janet. Mr. Webster says. Last week, I brought Edmund Robinson and his father into my church and asked them about the boy's story. Many people believed Edmund's story, but some people didn't. Edmund Robinson is going to London tomorrow with his father, and a judge is going to question them. The guard comes back and begins to open the door. Time, he says. Mr. Webster stands up. God is here with you, Janet. Never forget that you can be happy when God is with you. I stand up too and take the bread from the table. Yes, Mr. Webster, God is with me. I believe that, but happy? How can I be happy? I go back into the dark passion, and the guard closed the door behind me. The woman ran to me. Bread. I go back into the dark person, and the guard closed the door behind me. The woman ran to me. Bread, give us bread, they cry. Quickly, I put the bread in my shirt. I don't want to lose it. I walk across the room and sit down on the floor. I am crying, but I feel a little better. Edmund Robinson, or Liu Church, is only 10 years old. Edmund told nice about me and about many women. She, he saw us at a virtuous meeting at a house called Hostones. It's not true, but many people believed him. What is going to see in London, the truth or more lies? But now, in the passion of Lancaster Castle, I want to tell my story. It is a story about rich men and angry villagers, about old women and hungry children. It is a true story and it happened to me. I was born in 1603. My family was always very poor, and after my father died, we were poor. In winter, I was often ill and I was always cold and hungry. In summer, I was sometimes ill and I was often cold and angry, hungry. We lived some miles from the village of Liu Church in an old house called Milking Tor. It was dirty and cold. The rain came in through the windows, and there were no doors. To the west was the big hill called Pender. Pender, Pendle Hill was beautiful. I loved Pendle Hill because it sat quietly all year and watched me. Chapter 1. The Ponder. My story begins on the 18th day of March in the year 1612. I was 9 years old, and my life began to change on that day. My mother and my grandmother were ill, and they sat on the floor with their dogs near the little fire. My sister Alison wanted to go out. I'm going to look for bread, she said. My brother James sat near the fire, his mouth open. Go and look for bread, he said. Go and look for bread. James often said things again and again. Alison ran out of the house and I followed her. Go and look for bread, James called. Alison began to go east, up the hill and past the big trees behind Malkin-Tor. Alison walked fast. She was 18 years old and she was tall with none. Dirty brown hair and a wild, hungry face. It was cold, but there was no rain. Alison wore a coat and some shoes, but I had no coat and no shoes. Please wait a minute, I called to my sister. I want to come with you. No, Alison cried. Go back, I don't want you. Suddenly, a dog ran in front of Alison. Good dog, good dog, Alison called. The dog ran to her and she put her hand on its head. It was my sister's dog and it liked her. It was a big dog with big teeth and I didn't like it because it was always hungry. I followed Alison and her dog along the river to Cologne. But before we arrived at Cologne, we met John Noel. John Noel was a big fat man, about 50 years old. Can I have some money, please? Alison called. I'm hungry. John didn't answer. He walked slowly because he was fat and because he carried a big bag on his back. In his bag were a lot of beautiful things. He was a peddler and he walked across the hills and visited all the villages. Can I have some money? Alison cried again. I'm very hungry. Joanna stopped. Stop following me, he said. I'm not going to give you money. Give me money, Alison said. I don't want to give you money, the peddler said. He took his hat off. There was not much hair on his head. I don't like you, and I don't like your family. A lot of bad women you are, and your father was a bad man too. Alison was angry. Don't talk about my father. He's dead now. Give me some money, old man. John's face was red. No, he cried. He began to walk up the hill to the village. Go back to your dead family. Alison began to laugh angrily. A dead man, she called. Dead before dark. John know. She looked down at her dog and put her hand on its head. Go after him, dog, she said. Go after him and get him. The big dog began to run after the pandanal. Juno stopped. He looked afraid and his face was very red. Call your dog back, you bad girl, he shouted. Suddenly, his mouth opened and his face went white. Slowly, he began to fall, and his big body hit the road. The dog came up to him, but the pandler did not move. Alison watched the journal for a minute. Then she said to me, Go and call someone from the village. I felt afraid, but I ran along the road very quickly. Help! Help! I called to the villagers. The peddler is ill. The villagers come out of their houses and followed me down the hill. A young man looked at the journal carefully. He's not dead, he said, but he's very ill. Let's move him to the latest house. Someone must go and call his son. Just then, John Noel began to talk very slowly. I can't move, he said. I'm alive, but I can't move. I went back to stand near Alison. The dog sat at her feet. That devious girl, Juno said slowly. She curved me. She wanted me to die, and her dog came to get me. All the villagers looked at Alison. I'm sorry, Alison said quickly. I'm very hungry and want some money. That's all. Go away, the villagers cried. You are a witch, and we don't want you in our village. Alison began to run away down the hill, and her dog followed. I watched the villagers. They cried Juno slowly up the hill to the nearest house, and then I followed my sister down the hill. I was hungry and tried, and Malkin Tor was many miles away. I was 9 years old, and angry. I was angry because the Pendno was ill. I was angry because the villagers didn't like me, and I was angry because my sister was a witch. Chapter 2. Roger Lowell. Juno was ill because Alison cursed him, and his son wanted Roch Lowell to question Alison. Roch Lowell was a rich and important man in Lancashire, and he was the judge for all the villages near Panderhall. He lived at Reed Hall, 7 miles from Newchurch. On the Thursday of March, Mr. Noel's men came to Malkintor. Mr. Noel wanted to see Alison at once. We walked from Malkintor to Reed Hall. my sister Alison, my brother James, and our mother, El- Elizabeth DeVess. I followed them because I didn't want to stay at home with my grandmother. My grandmother was a difficult older woman, and I didn't like her. Red Hill was an old house with a big garden and many old trees. Mr. Noel's servant opened the door for us. Come in, Mr. Noel said. He was a tall man with a lot of white hair. His black coat looked warm and expensive. Alison followed Mr. Noel into a room with a big fire. When I saw the fire, I want to go in too. Are you cold, little one? Mr. Noel asked me. Come in and sit near the fire. I went across the room and sat down on the floor next to the wonderful hot fire. Mr. Noel sat behind a big table. Two or three men in black coats stood near a window. Alison stood in front of Mr. Noel. Her long hair was dirty, and her old dress looked dirtier. 2 weeks ago, on the 18th day of March, you met Joanna near Cologne, George Lovel said. His voice was slow and careful. Tell me about it. I asked for money, Alison said. The peddler was very angry and I didn't like him. I was angry, too, and I want him to die. Tell me about your dog. The dog is my friend, Alison said slowly. I want a friend, and I found that dog 2 months ago. I told my grandmother, and she liked the dog too. Did the dog run after the panda? Yes, of course. I cursed the panda and the dog ran after him. Alison said, I'm sorry now because Mr. Law is ill. She's a witch, one of the men said quietly. Roger Llewellyn stood up and walked across the room to the door. James Device came in. We want to question you. James came in and stood next to Alison. James was 13 years old, nearly a man, but he was afraid of many things. He began to cry. Don't be afraid, Mr. Newell said. We want you to talk about your grandmother, old Demandek. But Alison wanted to talk. Don't ask him, she said quickly. I can tell you about my grandmother because I'm with her every minute of the day. I go with her from village to village. I go with her across Pandora Hill. She asks people for money and food, and I help her. Alison stopped. She looked at James, and then she looked at Mr. Lowell. She cursed a child once, and the child died later that year. And you, James said, you cursed a child too. Somebody told me. James suddenly sat down on the floor and began to laugh loudly. Be quiet, Roger Lowell said coldly. Alison Device, tell me the truth. Did you curse a child? Yes, I did, Alison cried. The child called me a witch, and I was angry. I cured the child, but I was sorry when the child died? James looked up at Allison, his mouth open. The child died. The child died. She, he said again and again. Allison devised. You cannot go home again, Roger Lowell said slowly. You must go to the Passion at Rate. But I lead, Allison, my mother shouted angrily from the door. She takes care of old domestic, my mother. I looked at my mother and at her red, angry face. I looked at Allison in her dirty dress and at James on the floor with his mouth open. And then I looked at Mr. Lowell. His brown eyes were warm, and his face was kind. Chapter 2. George Lowell. On the second day of April, Roger Lowell and his men came to Ashna House, near the village of French. Mr. Lowell wanted to talk to my grandmother, and we all went with her to Ashna House. Friends was not far from McIntyre, and my grandmother walked there easily. Old Demetric was a little old woman with a fat face and no teeth. She was nearly 80 years old, and she was a difficult old woman. Without Allison, she was more difficult because my mother didn't take care of her. When I saw Mr. Lowell again at Ashna House, I felt happy. I looked at his kind face and his warm brown eyes, and I wanted to be near him, but there were a lot of people in the room, and I was afraid to go to him. Old Demetric, I'm going to ask you some questions, Mr. Lowell began. Old Demetric was not afraid. She looked at all the men in their expensive coats and hats. What can a poor old woman tell you, Richmond? Richmond? She laughed, and when he laughed, I felt afraid. My grandmother was going to tell them everything, and she did. 20 years ago, I met the devil. Old domestic said. He was a boy called Table, and he was my friend. Then a cat came to visit me, a beautiful cat, and then a dog. They were all my friends. Mr. Lowell listened quietly to my grandmother, but some of the men began to talk angrily. Be careful, you rich man, my grandmother cried. I can cure you. I can kill people. I make curry picture of people, man, woman, or child. And when I break the clam, the man, woman, or child dies. People began to shout. She's a witch. She must die. Say no more. She must die with all her family. Roger Lowell shut up. Be quiet. He looked at the guns near the door. Take her away, he said. Old Demandek and her granddaughter Alison must go to the passion at Lancaster Castle. The guard took my grandmother by the arms and carried her out of the door and put her on a horse. Everyone ran out of Asnar house. They ran after the horses and shouted, "Kill the witch!" I looked for Mr. Llewell, but he was on his horse too, and he followed the guards quickly through the village. Slowly, I followed my mother and James. Milking Tor was my home, but I didn't want to go back there. I was a little child, and I wanted someone kind to take care of me. We stayed at home for days because we were afraid to go out. James sat in front of the fire with his dog and talked. Lancaster Castle, Lancaster Castle, he said again and again. My mother had me and shot at me because she was angry with the rich man. But after 3 days, my mother shortly said, James, we are hungry and we must eat. James didn't answer. My mother went across the room to James and pulled his hair. Get up, she shouted. Go out and find food for us. Your father isn't here now. You must find food for us. She shot him over the head. James stopped up slowly. Go out and find food, he said. I must go out and find food. It was dark, and James was out for hours. But in the morning, she came back with a sheep. I want to really, James said happily. I got this sheep, and now we can eat. Get up, Janet, my mother shouted. Come and help me. It was Friday, the 10th day of April. My family had some foods. Poor people, and on that day they come to Milking Tor. They come and ask about old Demetric and Alison, and they stayed to eat and drink. I helped my mother. We cooked the sheep over a big fire, and our visitors ate with us. At the same time, they drank. They sat by the fire and drank, and talked about Lancaster Castle. Let's go there, an old woman cried. Let's go to Lancaster Castle and find old De Demdek and Ellison. Chapter 2. Roger Llewell 3. We can curse the guards and break down the door, my mother said. Let's bring them home, said an old man. Janet, bring the bottle. We need more drink, shouted my mother. I got up and took more drink to my mother, but I fell over one of the dogs, and the bottle broke on the floor. The drink was gone. You had, you bad child, my mother shouted. You are a witch too, you know. She got up and began to hit me. She hit me over the head and pulled my hair. An old man laughed, and then everyone laughed. I ran back across the room. I wasn't a witch. I was a child, 9 years old, and I hated my mother. and all her friends. My face felt very hot because I was angry. I left the room and went out of the house. It was afternoon, but the sky was dark with rain. Panda Hill was dark too. I sat quietly and watched me. I'm going to Mr. Noel, I said quietly. To Panda Hill. I'm going to tell him about my mother and her friends. Chapter 3. A Family of Witches. I ran from Mercantor down the hill into New Church. James followed me. I want to go to Read Hall too, he said. We ran through the trees to Sabden Brook. The noise of the river was beautiful in my ears. We went along the river to the village of Sabden, and then it began to rain. Suddenly, we heard the noise of horses behind us. We got off the road and watched the horses. It was Roger Llewellyn with some of his men. They saw us, and Mr. Llewellyn stopped it. It's the Device children, he said. What's your name, child? My name is Janet, I said. We are going to Read Hall. I want to talk to you. Roger Lowell looked at me with his warm green eyes. Very well, he said. Come home with me, and we can talk. He left me up onto his horse, and the horse moved quickly along the road to the village of Red. James ran along behind us. Very soon, we arrived at the Red Hall. The servant opened the door for us, and we went into the warm house. James came in, too, and sit down next to me near the fire. Mr. Lowell put his black hat down on the table. Bring a hot drink and some food for these children, he told the servant. They are cold and hungry. The servant brought bread and hot milk for us, and James and I ate hungrily. I felt warm and happy in Mr. Llewellyn's house. I wanted to stay there all my life. I never want to go back to Malkintor. When we finished eating, Mr. Llewellyn looked up from his book. You wanted to talk to me, he said quietly. Well, I'm listening. I got up, went across the room, and stood in front of Mr. Llewellyn. I'm afraid of my mother, I began. I'm afraid because she's rich and she can kill people. The room was quiet. Mr. Llewellyn said nothing, but his brown eyes were kind. My mother and her friends are at Malkintor. I told him they want to go to Lancaster Castle and kill the guards. They are going to bring old Demedic and Ellison home again. Mr. Llewellyn got up and left the room. After some time, he came back with two of his friends. They all sit down at the table. Janet, I want you to tell me again about your mother and her friends. They want to kill the guards at Lancaster Castle and bring old Demandek home to Malkintor, I said. Then I began to cry. Don't cry, Mr. Lowell said kindly. We can help you, but we must talk to your brother first. James, he called. Tell me about your mother. Is she a witch? She's a witch. We are all witches, James began. Old Demetric's a witch. One night, she went to the church at New Church and got some teeth from dead bodies there. The devil talked to her, and she brought the teeth to Mactantor. They are under the ground by our door. Old Demetric words. We know that, Mr. Llewell said. Tell us about your mother. Mother's a witch, James said. She killed Mr. Robinson from Burley Village. She made a clay picture, and then she broke it, and Mr. Robinson died a week later. James smiled at Mr. Lowell. He liked Mr. Lowell because Mr. Lowell didn't shout at him, and I'm a witch too. I can kill people. No, James, I cried. You are not a witch. You don't kill people. Yes, I do, James said angrily. His face went red. My dog, Dandy, is the devil and he killed a man for me. I wanted a shirt and Mr. Duckworth was going to give me one of his old shirts, but in the end he didn't give it to me, and I was very angry. I nearly killed Mr. Duckworth, but I called Dandy, and he killed Mr. Duckworth for me. I began to cry. My brother was a witch too. All my family were witches. Chapter 3. A Family of Witches 2. Don't cry, Janet, Mr. Noel said. Someone must take care of you. You can stay here at Reed Hall with me. When Mr. Noelman brought my brother to Reed Hall, she said nothing at first. Tell us about the pictures of Claire, Mr. Lowell said. My men found pictures of Claire at McIntyre. My mother said nothing. Your mother, old Demetric, is a witch. Your daughter is a witch, Mr. Noel said. Your son killed Mr. Duckworth because of a shit. Now tell us about the clay pictures. My mother said nothing. James told us about Mr. Robinson of Briley. Mr. Lowell said, Did you kill him? Suddenly, my mother's face went red and she began to shout at James. A good son, you are. You told this rich man about Jack Robinson of Bali? Well, you told the truth. I killed him. I made a clear picture and then I booked it. And a week later, he died. I killed him because I hate him. She stopped and looked at me. I want to run away, but Mr. Lowell's servant stood in front of the door. Then my mother laughed. Janet Device, witch's daughter. You hate us. I know that. Well, it doesn't matter because you are right. You are different. You are my daughter, but you are not the daughter of my husband. Your father was a rich man, but he never gave me money. A witch's child, he called you. And when you were born, he never came near me again. Jack Robinson learned the truth about your father. He told the villagers of Briley and they called me a bad woman. But they didn't call your father a bad man. Nobody in Briley gave me food again. Because of Jack Robinson, I hate him. And so I killed him. The room was very quiet, and my mother laughed again. My hands felt cold and my face was hot, but I didn't cry. When Mr. Device died, I cried for days, but he was not my father. I looked at my mother, at her dirty hair and her ugly face and her angry eyes. I hated her then, and I hated her for many years. Chapter 4: Truth and Lies. On the 27th day of April, the guns took my mother and James to Lancaster Castle, and my life at Reed Hall began. Suddenly it was spring. The sky was blue, and there were beautiful flowers on the hills from Reed Hall. Ponder Hall looked different. It looked smaller, and it was not so important in my life. Sometimes I walked along Subden, broke to Subden, and then to New Church, and I felt happy to be near Panda Hill again. But I never visited Malkin Tor again. Spring changed into summer, and in August I went to Lancaster with Mr. Noel. Lancaster was 30 miles from Reed Hall, and I got very tired because I sat on a horse for hours. It was a big noise stall. I never saw so many people before in my life, and I felt afraid. The tribe of the witches of Pandar began at Lancaster Castle on the 18th day of 18th day of August, and the judge was an important man from London. Judge Brayley listened to many people on that day. because there were a lot of witches from Lancashire in the Passion. Old Mendick was not there because she died in May. Before the judge arrived, I waited with Mr. Lowell's servant, and when a guard called my name, I went through a big door and saw the judge behind a table. Judge Bromley was rich and important, but his eyes were cold. Suddenly, I saw my mother. She was dirty and very thin. When she saw me, her face went red. My hair was clean now, and I wore shoes and an expensive dress. I saw my mother's eyes. She hated me. Are you a witch? Judge Bromley asked my mother. No, I'm not, my mother answered angrily. Did you kill Jack Robinson or Billy Wedge? No, I did not. Janet Device is here, a voice said quietly. It was Mr. Lowell. She can tell us the truth about her mother. For a minute, my mother did not move. Then she ran across the room and shouted at me. You know nothing, you bad child. And I'm your mother. Don't forget that. The guards ran after my mother and pulled her to the floor. I'm not rich, my mother shouted. It's all nice, Janet. You are a witch, a child of the devil. You are my daughter, and I know. I was afraid and I put my hands over my eyes. I didn't want to see my mother's ugly face. The guards put my mother out of the room and the noise stopped. Janet Device, the judge said, tell us the truth about your mother. George Noel lifted me up and put me on a table in front of the judge. My mother is a witch, I began. She has a friend, a dog called Bill. When she wants to kill somebody, she tells Billy, I talked and talked. I told the judge everything. Judge Burley listened carefully. My child, is this the truth? Yes, I answered. I'm telling you the truth. The guards brought my mother back into the room again. Her face looked tired and her eyes were red. Elizabeth Device, your daughter told us about your dog. Belle, your son too, told us about the club pictures. We know everything. My mother said nothing. She didn't look at the judge, and she didn't look at me. Next, the guards brought my mother James into the room. When I saw James, I wanted to cry. James was thin and dirty, and his hair was very long. He looked at the judge and at all the rich and important men in the room, and he began to cry. Then he sat down on the floor. Stand up, James Device, Judge Brolly said. The guards pulled James up, but he fell to the floor again. You killed Mr. Duckworth, Judge Brolly said. I want a shot, James said. Is your brother a witch? Judge Brolly asked me. Yes, I said. My brother sat on the floor, his mouth open. He looked at me. but he didn't know me. I was clean and fat because of all the good food at Red Hall. Chapter 4: Truth and Lies. James told me about his friend, Dandy. I began. Dandy was deaf and James had the lame Dandy, and he began to cry again. I want Dandy. I want to go home. The guards pulled him up from the door and took him out of the room. I never saw my brother again. When the guards brought my sister Alison in front of the judge, I said nothing. Jono, the pandor, came into the room. He was a thin man now. He walked slowly and he talked slowly and his face looked ill. He told the judge about that day near Clun when Alison crossed him and his dog ran after him. I'm sorry, Alison said. I was angry with you that day, but I'm sorry now. Alison's eyes were dark and afraid. But she had no friends in that room, and nobody wanted to listen to her. Then Mr. Lowell took me out, and I waited with his servant in different room. An hour later, there was the noise of many people shouting and crying. The servant smiled. The tale is finished, he said. You are a good child, Janet. You told the judge the truth about the witches. Mr. Noel took me home to Redhall, and on the 20th day of August, 1612, the guards took my mother, my sister, and my brother out of prison and hanged them in front of Lancaster Castle, and so I lost my family. When I was a child, I wanted to be happy. I wanted to be warm, to wear shoes, to eat good food. I wanted someone to take care of me. That's all. My mother gave me nothing. She gave me no love. She never took care of me because my mother was a witch. My father ran away and I never knew him. My father was a rich man without a lamb, and I lived hungry and cold with a witch. And so I told Judge Plumley the truth about my family. Was I wrong? I don't know. I was happy for years at Ridge Hall. For 21 years, I forgot my family. I learned to talk for the Lowell family. I worked many hours every day, but I was warm and I ate good food every Sunday in my best dress. I went to church every summer. I walked over Panda Hall. I never thought about my family because I was happy at Reed Hall. In August 1312, the guards hanged my family in front of Lancaster Castle, but their dead face waited for me there, and a year ago, in 1663, when the guards put me in the Passion in Lancaster Castle, I meet them again, day after day. I see their ugly, dead faces and hear their cold, angry voices. I think of them all the time. God is with me here, in passion. I believe that, but my dead family is with me too. Mr. Webster from the church at Caldwaker visits me again. His blue eyes are tired, but he smiles at me. Edmund Robinson and his father told the truth in London. He says quietly, "The child told lies about you because he was afraid of his father. He wanted his father to love him." I see nothing. Mr. Webster wants to be kind, but he cannot help me. Mr. Noel cannot help me because he is dead. Edmund Robinson is only a child. He tells lies one day, and the truth the next day, but the truth cannot help me. What can I do against hate and lies? When Mr. Noel was alive, the villagers didn't talk about me. But when Mr. Lowell died, the lies began. The villagers are all afraid of me because my name is Device. They hate me because my name is Device. They say I'm a witch because my name is Device. I come from a family of witches, but I am not a witch. Nobody died because I cursed them. I never made clay, clay pictures. I never had a cat or dog. I only wanted to live quietly at Red Hall and watch the changes skins over Red Hall. When I was a child, I was always cold and hungry, and hated my family because they were witches. In 1612, I told the truth, and the truth killed my family. Now, 22 years later, lies are going to kill me here in Lancaster Castle, and I am cold and hungry again. Mr. Webster gives me bread, and I go back into the passion. I can never go back to Red Hall. I know that now. I must stay here in Lancaster Castle with my dead family. They are watching me and waiting me. I can never be free of them. This is my true story. I want to finish it now. Okay, see you guys next time. Goodbye.